They laughed when they weren't supposed to. These Golden Age parody films didn't just poke fun. They challenged power, mocked institutions, and sometimes enraged entire governments. Many were censored, some were banned, and a few nearly ended careers. But all of them went too far, in the best way possible. These are 16 Golden Age parody films that crossed the line and made history. 1. Duck Soup, 1933. In 1933, the Marx Brothers weren't just telling jokes, they were setting fire to political norms. Duck Soup was no ordinary comedy. It was a scathing parody of war, nationalism, and the blind obedience that leads nations to ruin. Groucho Marx plays Rufus T. Firefly, the dictator of a fictional country, who wages war for absurd reasons and turns diplomacy into slapstick chaos. Audiences laughed, but politicians and patriots weren't amused. The film mocked everything sacred about state power. Firefly's erratic leadership mirrored real-world fascists rising in Europe long before many Americans were ready to face that reality. The satire was too sharp, too timely. Italy's dictator Benito Mussolini even banned the movie in his country. At home, critics were divided. Some hailed it as genius. Others called it anti-American. Paramount, unsure how to market a film with no love story and no happy ending, let it quietly slip through theaters. And though it flopped at first, Duck Soup grew into a cultural icon. Today, it's remembered not just as one of the greatest comedies ever made, but as one of the bravest. The Marx Brothers didn't just make a parody, they declared war on war itself. And in doing so, they went further than anyone expected, blurring the line between comedy and rebellion. $2 Million Legs, 1932. Before Duck Soup raised eyebrows, $1 Million Legs paved the way for chaos. This pre-code absurdist comedy starred W.C. Fields as the president of Klopstokia, a fictional country where every woman is named Angela and men compete in Olympic games like furniture lifting. It was nonsense. And that was the point. The film satirized global politics, the obsession with physical culture, and the ridiculous nationalism driving Olympic competitions. But its surreal tone made it a tough pill for many to swallow. Released during the Great Depression, some viewers wanted optimism or order, not a world where logic collapsed and an international athletic contest decided foreign aid. Censors weren't sure what to make of it. The film's irreverence toward leadership, its veiled innuendos, and its gleeful insanity led to pushback from conservative critics. The movie didn't just go off the rails, it gleefully destroyed the tracks. Behind the scenes, studio executives panicked at how far the film had gone. W.C. Fields, always a thorn in the side of authority, seemed to revel in pushing limits. And while $1 Million Legs wasn't banned, it was buried, receiving little promotion and quickly disappearing from theaters. Today, it's remembered by cult film lovers as one of the most bizarre and brilliant parodies of the Golden Age. It may have gone too far, but that was its superpower. It dared to be utterly illogical in a world desperately clinging to reason. 3. The Great Dictator, 1940. Charlie Chaplin was known for slapstick charm and silent grace, but in 1940, he broke his silence with The Great Dictator, and the world shook. The film was a direct, fearless parody of Adolf Hitler, with Chaplin playing both the ruthless fascist Adenoid Hinkle and a humble Jewish barber caught in the madness. At a time when Hollywood studios tiptoed around European dictators, Chaplin stepped forward and laughed in their faces. And it cost him. The film was banned in Germany, Italy, and several Nazi-occupied nations. In the US, Isolationists called it propaganda. Some theaters refused to show it, fearing backlash. Yet the film struck a chord. Now, it wasn't just comedy, it was conscience. Chaplin's final monologue, unscripted and raw, called for peace, democracy, and human dignity. It was bold, it was dangerous, and it was unforgettable. Chaplin later admitted he might not have made the film had he known the full extent of Nazi atrocities. But his timing, mocking tyranny before the world truly understood its horror, was prophetic. The Great Dictator didn't just parody fascism, it confronted it. In doing so, Chaplin crossed every line of safety and comfort, delivering the most courageous satire of the Golden Age. Hell's a Poppin', 1941. You've never seen a movie like Hell's a Poppin'. Most people hadn't, even when it first hit screens. It was a cinematic fever dream, a parody so meta, so chaotic, that it seemed to unravel the very idea of storytelling. Based on the hit Broadway revue, Hell's a Poppin' broke every rule. Characters jump between scenes, argue with the projectionist, and reference the audience in real time. The film mocked Hollywood musicals, romantic cliches, and even the idea of coherent plots. The result? Confusion, controversy, and cult admiration. Censors were baffled. One scene involving suggestive dancing had to be cut in certain states. Another gag implying characters were literally in hell was seen as blasphemous. Studio execs fought with the filmmakers, fearing audiences wouldn't understand it. They were right and wrong. Many viewers didn't get it, and the film underperformed. But decades later, Hell's a Poppin' is recognized as one of the most groundbreaking parodies ever made. It paved the way for future meta-comedies like Airplane and Monty Python. This was parody at its wildest. Too smart for its own time, too weird for the mainstream. And that's exactly what made it revolutionary. 5. Murder by Television, 1935. On the surface, Murder by Television might seem like a basic mystery thriller. But beneath the spooky lighting and Bela Lugosi's ominous presence lies a strange, unintended parody of emerging technology and media hysteria. Released in the midst of America's fascination and fear of technological advancement, the film centers on a television inventor who's murdered on air. What follows is a bizarre mashup of horror tropes, science fiction absurdity, and unintentional comedy. The characters behave erratically. The dialogue veers into the surreal, and Lugosi gives one of the most delightfully over-the-top performances of his career, playing two roles just to amp up the confusion. Critics and audiences didn't know what to make of it. The film felt like it was parodying something serious. Television, the media, even the crime genre itself, but without admitting it. It became a strange, campy mess that studios hoped would be spooky. Instead, it came across as laughable. Over the years, Murder by Television developed a cult following not because it was scary, but because it was so absurdly off that it parodied itself. Bela Lugosi, known for his gothic horror credibility, leaned so far into melodrama that the film borders on satire. Was it intentional parody, or just a misguided production? That's the mystery. Either way, it went too far, delivering a tone so strange it felt like a mockery of both the future and itself. 6. Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, 1941. W.C. Fields was no stranger to controversy, but with Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, he went completely rogue. This was Fields uncensored, unfiltered, and utterly unconcerned with what the studio, or the audience, wanted. The film is structured like a movie within a movie, with Fields pitching a surreal script that defies logic. There are talking birds, romantic triangles in mid-air, and wild sequences that smash the fourth wall. It's not just a parody of Hollywood. It's a full-on takedown of its logic, its executives, and its predictability. Universal Pictures was horrified. Fields' drunken persona, disdain for the system, and surreal writing led to clashes with the studio at every turn. Executives tried cutting scenes, but the entire film was so strange they didn't know how to save it. The film was released quietly, without fanfare, and Fields' contract with Universal wasn't renewed afterward. What made it go too far wasn't just its tone. It was its complete rebellion against storytelling norms. Fields mocked the structure of cinema, the idea of coherent narratives, and the notion that movies should make sense. It was funny, but it was also threatening to a system built on formula. Today, it's seen as a hit of its time, an absurdist masterpiece. But in 1941, it was viewed as dangerous chaos. Fields took parody to the edge of madness and fell in love with the fall. 7. You Nasty Spy, 1940. Long before Chaplin's The Great Dictator stirred global controversy, You Nasty Spy lit the fuse. The Three Stooges, kings of slapstick, took aim at Adolf Hitler in this jaw-dropping parody that was released while America was still neutral in World War II. Mo Howard plays Mo Hailstone, a dictator of Moronica who's an obvious caricature of Hitler, complete with mustache, arm salutes, and delusional rhetoric. The short film ridiculed fascist leaders, propaganda, and blind nationalism with biting accuracy, hidden under the guise of silly antics and cream pies. But this was more than clowning around. This was protest. Releasing such a direct satire of Hitler in 1940 was nearly unthinkable. The United States hadn't entered the war yet, and many Americans were still isolationist. Studios typically avoided offending foreign governments to preserve distribution deals, but not Columbia Pictures. Not this time. The short was banned in parts of Europe. Some American critics called it distasteful and risky. The Hays office, which enforced moral guidelines in Hollywood, barely allowed it through, only because it was technically a comedy short. The film's impact was seismic. It proved that even slapstick could carry powerful political punches. It also showed that parody wasn't always harmless. Sometimes, it was the most dangerous genre of all. You Nasty Spy went too far for many, but in hindsight, it went exactly as far as it needed to. 8. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, 1948. By the late 1940s, Universal's horror icons, Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman, had become part of Hollywood royalty. So when Abbott and Costello decided to lampoon them in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, it felt like heresy. Mixing horror and comedy was a gamble. This wasn't just poking fun at a single trope. This was taking the studio's most beloved monsters and making them punchlines. Some critics and studio execs feared it would destroy the Universal monster's legacy entirely. But the film went all in. It kept the monsters serious. Bela Lugosi returned as Dracula, Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, and Glenn Strange as Frankenstein's monster, while Abbott and Costello delivered a whirlwind of gags, mistaken identities, and slapstick terror. It worked, but not without backlash. Purists were horrified. Censors in some regions took issue with scenes they deemed too violent for comedy and too silly for horror. Universal Studios themselves were nervous about what this parody would do to their profitable horror franchise. Instead, it became a sleeper hit and one of the duo's most iconic films. But make no mistake, it crossed a sacred line. It mocked the monsters audiences once feared. And in doing so, it reinvented horror itself, forever blurring the line between screams and laughter. 9. The Palm Beach Story, 1942. Preston Sturges was no stranger to bending rules, but The Palm Beach Story was his most outrageous romantic satire. At a glance, it's a screwball comedy about a woman leaving her broke husband to find a rich man who can fund his dreams. But dig deeper, and you'll find a sharp, scandalous parody of American marriage, gender roles, and the transactional nature of love. Claudette Colbert's character openly admits she's using her beauty to manipulate wealthy men. She flirts, deceives, and outwits the social elite, not to fall in love, but to finance her ex. Meanwhile, her husband fumbles through jealousy and pride, representing a fragile masculinity that was rarely mocked so boldly in 1940s cinema. The satire is razor sharp. Wealthy millionaires are portrayed as cartoonishly naive. Socialites are drunk, fickle, and ridiculous. The film's treatment of marriage as a financial contract outraged traditionalists and religious groups. It wasn't just the idea of divorce or remarriage, it was the film's casual attitude about it. Censors at the Production Code Administration nearly blocked the film for its suggestive themes and thinly veiled critiques of proper society. Several scenes had to be rewritten, and even then, it was released under protest. Despite the controversy, it was a hit. But the film's legacy lies in how far it was willing to go. It laughed in the face of sacred institutions. It suggested that love and money were interchangeable. And it delivered all of this under the glittering guise of romantic comedy, making the bite all the more dangerous. 10th Roman Scandals, 1933. Pre-code Hollywood was a playground for subversion, and Roman scandals might have been one of its most deliriously inappropriate toys. Starring Eddie Cantor, the film follows a modern man who dreams he's living in ancient Rome, only to find a world of tyranny, injustice, and risque comedy. This wasn't just a musical or a fantasy. It was an outlandish parody of dictatorship, heroism, and even slavery. And it did so with outrageous dance numbers, suggestive jokes, and costumes so skimpy that censors were left clutching their pearls. The satire didn't pull punches. The Roman rulers were depicted as corrupt caricatures, with scenes clearly mocking fascist leaders, years before the full rise of Hitler and Mussolini. The enslaved women in the palace? Played for titillation, but also presented as far more cunning than their male captors. Eddie Cantor's wide-eyed, fast-talking everyman mocked the idea of heroic masculinity altogether. Religious leaders were appalled. Some theaters refused to show it. In a few states, the film was edited or outright banned for what was seen as lewd content and political mockery. The Hays Office, which hadn't yet clamped down fully on Hollywood, used Roman scandals as part of the argument for stricter censorship. And yet, the film thrived, financially and culturally. It was brash, colorful, and absurd. But most of all, it was fearless. Roman scandals dared to laugh at history, authority, and morality itself. And in doing so, it helped usher in the need for the very censorship it pushed against. 11. The Court Jester, 1955. The pellet with the poisons in the vessel with the pestle. That tongue-twisting line is just one example of how the court jester turned medieval adventure into absolute farce. Danny Kaye starred as a bumbling performer who accidentally becomes a royal assassin, then a knight, then a hero. It's a parody of every sword and sorcery epic ever made, and it's sliced deep. The film is a whirlwind of rapid-fire wordplay, musical absurdity, and visual gags. But underneath all that comedy is a scathing parody of monarchy, military hierarchy, and blind loyalty. The knights are fools, the royalty is corrupt, and the peasants are smarter than everyone. Hollywood loved period pieces that glorified chivalry. The court jester laughed in their faces. At the time, critics were divided. Some hailed the brilliance of its clever script, while others criticized it for being too manic, too silly, or too chaotic. It also had trouble finding an audience upon release, partly because its satire was buried under layers of slapstick and song. Yet, over time, it became a cult classic. One reason? It went far beyond what audiences expected. It didn't just make fun of a genre, it deconstructed it. The film made a mockery of traditional masculinity, of heroism, of nobility itself. Even today, it's one of the most intelligent and subversive comedies of the Golden Age. And for daring to laugh at the past so boldly, it earned its place as a parody that went gleefully too far. 12. The Loved One, 1965. Though stretching the edge of the Golden Age, The Loved One was still a product of that era's shifting satire, and it shattered all remaining boundaries. Based on Evelyn Waugh's brutal novel, this film dared to mock the funeral industry, American consumerism, religion, Hollywood, and just about everything else. It follows a young British poet who gets swept up in Los Angeles' bizarre mortuary scene. The funeral homes are grotesque palaces of plastic beauty. The cremation center looks like a Vegas show. A pet cemetery operates with more dignity than human funerals. The result? A black comedy that made audiences gasp between laughs. The satire was vicious. Funeral directors are depicted as profit-hungry charlatans. Religious figures are either lunatics or liars. Hollywood executives appear shallow and predatory. There's even a taxidermist who freezes corpses like frozen dinners. When it premiered, critics didn't know how to respond. Some praised its guts. Others were disgusted. Censors tried to tone down its most outrageous sequences. But the film kept its fangs. The public? Shocked. Death had always been sacred. So had Hollywood glamour. The Loved One poked fun at both, and didn't stop there. It became infamous for its unapologetic approach, its cold humor, and its unapologetic smirk in the face of death. It's not just a parody, it's an act of cinematic defiance. 13. A Southern Yankee, 1948. Red Skelton wasn't known for political controversy, but a Southern Yankee turned his goofy antics into a surprising grenade lobbed at American history. In this Civil War farce, Skelton plays a hotel bellboy who's mistaken for a Confederate spy and gets recruited by Union forces to infiltrate enemy lines. What follows is a whirlwind of mistaken identities, disguises, and comic disasters. But beneath the slapstick lies biting satire. The film mocks the absurdity of war, the confusion of loyalties, and even the romanticizing of Confederate valor. At a time when post-war America clung to patriotic unity, the idea of lampooning the Civil War didn't sit well with many. Some Southern audiences walked out in protest. Critics in conservative states condemned the movie for disrespecting national memory. Skelton's portrayal of a bumbling soldier highlights the futility of war rather than the glory. Commanders are shown as incompetent. Strategies are based on luck or lies. And the entire military hierarchy is treated as a joke. This wasn't just funny, it was dangerous. Even with its light tone, the film's implication was clear. War is often absurd, and history's heroes may have been fools. That kind of message, wrapped in comedy, can be more provocative than a lecture. The censors let it slide, barely, because it was just a comedy. But the cultural backlash proved otherwise. A Southern Yankee went further than it appeared. In mocking a defining chapter of American identity, it crossed a line that most comedies avoided, making it one of the boldest parodies of its era. 14. The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, 1944. Imagine a wartime film where a young woman parties with soldiers, gets unknowingly married, and ends up pregnant, all without knowing who the father is. Now imagine that film being a comedy, released at the height of World War II. That's The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, and it blew the lid off everything Hollywood censors were trying to keep closed. Directed by Preston Sturges, the film centers on Trudy Cockenlocker, a small-town girl who wakes up with a wedding ring and a baby on the way, but no memory of her husband's name. The plot parodies wartime romances, patriotism, and the idealized lissome American girl trope with ruthless charm. The Hayes office was horrified. The film was delayed for over a year while Sturges battled censors over its morality. The production code forbade implications of premarital pregnancy, promiscuity, or disrespect for the military. The Miracle of Morgan's Creek had all three. But Sturges, a master manipulator of dialogue and implication, disguised scandal beneath wit so clever that the censors couldn't quite pin it down. Audiences, however, got the message loud and clear. The film was a hit and a scandal. Critics praised its daring satire. Religious groups condemned it. Politicians called it dangerous. Yet it endured, even thrived. Because it wasn't just a comedy. It was a grenade disguised as a valentine, parodying America's most sacred wartime ideals and forcing the country to laugh at its own contradictions. 15. The Horn Blows at Midnight, 1945. Few films have achieved such cult infamy as The Horn Blows at Midnight. Jack Benny starred as an angel sent to Earth to blow the trumpet signaling the end of the world. But things don't go as planned, and soon the film turns into a slapstick disaster of divine proportions. At the time, critics hated it. Audiences stayed away. And Jack Benny himself made it a running joke for decades, claiming it nearly ruined his career. But here's what's often missed. The Horn Blows at Midnight was a surreal religious parody that mocked apocalyptic fear, heavenly bureaucracy, and the idea of divine perfection. It was less bad than it was too weird, too soon. The film portrays angels as civil servants, heaven as a dull office, and the end of the world as an administrative mistake. This irreverent vision of the divine upset religious viewers who were used to reverence in their cinema. Even Benny's performance, a mixture of earnestness and bumbling charm, was a parody of cinematic heroes and spiritual messengers. The film went far beyond slapstick. It suggested, through laughter, that even heaven doesn't have its act together. That was too far for 1945, especially in a post-war moment where people were seeking hope and spiritual comfort. The film bombed, but in retrospect, it was daringly original. A comedy that dared to parody God's plan? That takes nerve, and The Horn Blows at Midnight had plenty of it. 16. Artists and Models, 1955. If you thought Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin were all charm and slapstick, Artists and Models might shock you. This technicolor explosion of absurdity satirized comic book culture, Cold War paranoia, and 1950s censorship, often in ways that were anything but subtle. Lewis plays a man whose bizarre dreams are turned into hit comic books by Martin. But the dreams are filled with violent, suggestive, and absurd imagery, leading to chaos with government agencies, moral watchdogs, and foreign spies. On the surface, it's a goofy musical, but underneath, it's a savage parody of McCarthyism, mass hysteria, and the ridiculous fears about comic books corrupting youth. The film even mocks the Comics Code Authority and the notion that art should be sanitized. Censors let it pass, but only barely. The innuendo was thick, the costumes were revealing, and the satire hit too close to home. Scenes mocking government overreach and propaganda during the Cold War were viewed by some as unpatriotic. Others were simply baffled at how Lewis's nonsensical dreams were allowed to take over the plot and the film's own logic. But artists and models didn't care about logic. It cared about freedom. Freedom to create, to mock, to question. It may have been packaged as a candy-colored comedy, but this film was subversive to its core. A parody that disguised its punch in song and dance, only to hit harder than anyone expected. These 16 Golden Age parody films didn't just entertain, they provoked, mocked, and rebelled. They dared to laugh where others stayed silent. And in doing so, they changed cinema forever. Which of these outrageous classics surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden film history.